The first lash ripped her blouse, the second tore her skin, but she didn't cry out. Eliza Stone stood barefoot in the dust outside St. Vincent's Chapel, the preacher's belt cracking down like a divine offering. Her arms were bound to the crossbeam of the hitching post, her head bowed not in shame, but to shield the defiance still blazing in her eyes. The crowd had gathered quickly, townsfolk who avoided her gaze yesterday now watching with bated breath, as if they were entitled to this display. Fornication, the preacher bellowed between strikes, for wickedness and deceit. The woman beside the sheriff nodded. The mayor's wife dabbed her eyes. No one stepped forward, not even when the sixth lash drew blood thick enough to stain the chapel steps. Eliza had always been different, too sharp, too proud, too unwilling to beg. She ran her father's old blacksmith forge after his death, never smiling when men called her darling. The town resented that. Then the boy arrived, a merchant's son with whispered promises and soft hands. He slipped into her bed, then vanished 2 weeks later. She stayed. When her belly began to swell, the punishment followed. At 27, unwed and unrepentant, that was enough. The preacher raised his belt for the seventh strike when the silence broke, not from Eliza, not from the crowd, but from the edge of the square where a man in a dust-worn coat stepped forward and kept walking. No badge, no rifle, no reason to belong. He moved through the crowd like they were shadows. The preacher faltered. Eliza raised her head, blood on her lip, hair matted, her eyes locking onto the stranger not with desperation, but recognition. She didn't know him, but something in her soul did. He climbed the chapel steps, untied the rope without a word. No one stirred, not even the sheriff. When her arms fell free, she collapsed. He caught her mid-fall, holding her like it was his purpose. Still silent, he wrapped her in his coat and stood between her and the town. They never heard him speak, and she didn't need him to. No one followed as he carried Eliza, her blood soaking his coat, his boots steady on the cracked street that had never seen a man like him. She drifted in and out, lips parted, eyes fluttering between pain and dream, her fingers faintly clutching his collar, sensing safety at last. He didn't take her to a doctor or ask for help. He walked past the smithy, past the well, to the abandoned cabin where Widow Harlan once lived, now rotting. Kicking the door open, he laid her on a cot, stripped her ruined blouse, and cleaned her wounds with water from his canteen. His hands were precise, yet gentle, as if he'd mended broken things before. When she woke, it was dark. His coat draped over her, heavy with his scent earth, tobacco, and a hint of sage. Her back throbbed, her lips swollen, but her mind was clear. Clutching the coat, she sat up and saw him sitting by the door, hat low, eyes like dusk watching her. "Why?" she whispered, voice cracking. He tilted his head, unfazed, looking at his hands. "You don't even know me," she tried again. He said nothing, just pulled a worn leather strip from his pocket, stitched at the edge. She recognized it instantly, her father's branding strap, used on every finished horse. She hadn't seen it in years. "Where did you get that?" she gasped. He met her eyes, and for a moment, something flickered, not fear, not pity, but memory. He didn't speak, just held the strap like a question only she could answer. Eliza reached for it, the stitching still there, her father's initials, the faint starburst he'd carved one drunken Sunday. It wasn't just a tool, it was her legacy. "This was lost in the fire," she said, voice thin. "I looked for weeks." He set it gently on the table, his silence heavier than words. "Did you know him?" "My father." He blinked once, then pulled a folded, yellowed paper from his coat. Her hand shook as she opened it, a rough charcoal sketch of her father laughing, a little girl on his shoulders. Her. She covered her mouth, tears spilling. "Who are you?" she whispered. He pointed to the paper's corner. T. Harlan. Her breath caught Widow Harlan's son. She remembered the widow, who took in strays, human or otherwise, dying in the flood with no family to claim her. But she had a son, and he'd drawn this. "You watched us," Eliza said, stunned. "You were there that day." He nodded. "Why didn't you say something then?" He stayed silent. She looked at him now, at the scar splitting his eyebrow, the tightened jaw. He hadn't come to save her, had come to return something, a memory, a kindness, a truth no one else carried. "You saw me before they did," she murmured, "and now you're here again." Their eyes met, needing no words, just a silence deep enough to hold the unspoken. The next morning, Eliza stepped outside, dust curling around her ankles like it awaited her next move. The church bell rang, cold and distant. She wore her father's patched coat, bandages beneath, hiding healing wounds. The silent man followed, shadowing her like a vow no one else dared make. The town expected her to vanish, to flee in shame like others branded before her. But Eliza didn't. She walked to the smithy, chin high, unlocked the door, and lit the forge as she had every morning before the boy with soft hands ruined everything. Flames roared. She fed them scrap iron and coals long waiting for purpose. By noon, people watched not to help, but to stare. The mayor's son crossed the street, saw her at the anvil, and paled. He didn't wave, didn't stop. She let him go and said nothing when she was dragged to the square. He deserved no words now. But what made him falter wasn't just her, it was the man beside her, hammering a blade, scars visible, quiet like truth carved into flesh. He never looked up, never asked for pay, just worked in rhythm with her, as if they'd learned from the same fire. When a child approached with a copper coin, Eliza took it gently, giving him a horseshoe etched with a single star, like the one on her father's strap. The child smiled and ran off. Eliza didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Glancing at the man, he met her gaze steady, proud. She wasn't the town story anymore. She was one they couldn't ignore. They called him the quiet one, arriving unnoticed, but after that morning at the forge, the town learned how loud silence could be. He fixed the saloon's piano with 3 nails and wire from his saddlebag, rebuilt the smithy's bellows with chapel fencewood, never charging, never nodding, just working. No one approached him without purpose, except Eliza. She spoke to his silence like it was her language. Coffee or tea, she'd ask, setting both mugs down. He always chose coffee. You're a left-handed shooter, aren't you? She said one evening, noticing his right wrist's twisted scars. He didn't flinch, just mimed a draw with his left hand. What happened? She asked. His fingers tapped 4 times, paused, then 4 again, Morse code her father taught her. Trap, it spelled. You trusted someone, she said. He looked away, message enough. That's how he told stories in gestures, pauses, fixed tools, sewn buttons, calmed horses. Eliza didn't need more. One night, she opened a box of her father's belongings, untouched since his death, burnt letters, a faded photo of her mother, a war coin. He sat beside her, handling each item like it was his own. When he reached a charred silver thimble, he closed her fingers around it, his look saying enough. She didn't cry, just nodded. When the world had punished her, this man had held her without question, rebuilding more than any apology could. A sharp knock came at dusk, deliberate and wrong. Eliza wiped soot from her hands as the man stepped forward, hand on his knife. The door creaked open to Reverend Hawthorne, boots polished, no trace of the man who'd wielded the belt. I've come to speak, he said, voice low. The man didn't move. Eliza stepped up. To speak, she echoed. Or to ask forgiveness? Hawthorne glanced into the cabin's shadows. Rumors of your defiance unsettle the townsfolk. Do they? She said coolly. I wonder why. He shifted. Your return to the forge, this man, the child you carry, stop, she snapped, sharp as an anvil. You lost the right to speak of him when you raised your hand instead of your heart. His jaw tightened. I acted on scripture. You acted on fear, she said, feeling the man's quiet presence behind her. You punished me to silence others. Yet here you are, he muttered. Because someone held me when no one else would. Hawthorne's eyes flicked to the man, bitterness flashing. He's not of this town. Neither am I anymore, she replied. I've outlived its judgment. He sighed, stepping back. Pride is a sin, Miss Stone. And cowardice is a plague, she said, one I've stopped inheriting. He left without blessing or apology, and Eliza smiled as she shut the door, needing no permission to speak. The man raised a brow. He won't come back, she said. He pulled a red coal from the hearth, pressing it into iron for her new brand, not punishment, but choice. For the first time, Eliza would carry a mark that was hers alone. By week's end, Eliza's name shifted from shame to warning. Men tipped hats to avoid her eyes. Whispers turned from harlot to witch or marked. Her silence made her dangerous. She walked beside the man every evening, hand sometimes on her belly, sometimes on his arm. At the store, the clerk fumbled her change. At the saloon, ranch hands froze when she entered for sugar. The worst was Beatrice, the merchant's sister, loud on the porch. She didn't even thank him. He risked his name, and she walks like she earned it. Eliza turned slowly. He didn't give me anything, she said. He just made it visible. The porch fell silent. The man stood behind her, arms crossed, his silence louder than fists. That night, on the swing she'd rebuilt, she asked, "What do you see when they look at me like that?" He handed her a cloth-wrapped item, a broken nail, bent, burned, forged into a ring, rough but shaped with care. Her fingers trembled. This is, he nodded, not a claim, but a truth. She wasn't too ruined. Her eyes shone as she slipped it on. The world had tried to silence her, but this man taught her silence could be strength if chosen. The storm came with purpose-low skies, sharp wind, thunder like memory. Eliza's contractions began after dusk, her hand gripping the table. The man didn't flinch. He built the fire, boiled water, stripped the bed with practiced hands, nodding when she said, "It's time." The wind howled, but Eliza didn't scream. She bore down, sweat-soaked, blood-warmed, crying out not from pain but power. He was there, hands steady, catching a red-faced, furious, alive boy. Eliza laughed, pulling him to her chest. "He looks like me," she whispered. The man brushed the baby's cheek, his mouth nearly smiling. "Will you name him?" she asked. He shook his head. She understood no shame, no stain, only fire and quiet. "I'll name him after the wind," she said, "because it never breaks." They didn't sleep, taking turns rocking the child by the fire's crackle, thunder fading into dawn. 3 weeks later, Eliza returned to the square for a lemon drop, refusing to live like a fugitive. Hair unbound, child strapped to her chest, the man beside her, people parted not with hostility, but hesitation, like yielding to a force they couldn't grasp. The church doors stayed shut, no sermon echoing. Hawthorne hadn't spoken her name since she'd stood again. Some said he sought transfer, others, he never preached of women again. Eliza passed without pausing, owing no prayer to walls that punished her. A child waved from the bakery, Eliza smiled. Small things returned. That evening, she laid the baby under a blanket sewn from her father's shirts, watching him sleep, hands curled like he held her heartbeat. "Will he understand?" she asked. The man didn't answer, carving a small horse, familiar but rough. "My first toy was like this," she said, tracing it. "My father made it when my mother died." His eyes softened. "What you gave me," she said, "wasn't rescue, it was a place to return to." He took her hand, and in that silence, something whole pulsed. He brushed her cheek. She leaned into it. Outside, twilight fell, and the town forgot how to define her, but she remembered who she was. Years later, they'd whisper of her like a myth. Some said she cast spells, others that the man was a ghost of her shame. But those who met her eyes knew she'd been broken publicly and rose without permission, not because someone fought, but because someone stood beside her, refusing to look away. Her boy grew tall with her eyes, asking once why no one named the man. Eliza smiled. Names don't make a man real. Deeds do. On her last day in the forge, she sealed a circular brand unbroken, joined at both ends and hung it above the door, a symbol that scars could be whole. She spoke less, needing no noise. The world had heard her scream, then her rebuild. When she passed, it was on her swing, child asleep, son by the chapel she no longer feared, the man beside her, hand on hers. No priest came to her burial, just townsfolk, hats in hands. Her son spoke. She wasn't shamed. She was sacred. He placed the nail ring in her palm. They say the man vanished, walking past the hills. But the swing remained, the forge, the brand above her legacy, built not with rage, but with chosen, steady strength. She'd been whipped before a church, but held by someone who needed no words to prove why she was worth it. That silence was the loudest of all.